What happens when the supreme protector of the universe decides that the only way to save a decaying world is to just completely drop his weapons?
It's a pretty massive question, right?
Yeah, I mean, today we are looking at what has to be the ultimate cosmic plot twist. You listening right now, you probably know Gautam Buddha as the historical founder of this massive global philosophy.
Right, the serene figure sitting quietly under a tree.
Exactly. But what happens when you view his life as, like, a divine cosmic intervention? An avatar sent down to the world, not to wage a physical war, but to actually infiltrate and conquer the human mind.
It really requires a profound paradigm shift in how we view these mythological and historical timelines. And, well, our mission in this deep dive is to impartially examine that exact intersection.
We've got a really diverse stack of sources to help us unpack this today.
We do. We have detailed historical texts that outline the life of Siddhartha Gautama. We're also bringing in some really fascinating scriptural analyses by Dr. Vineet Agarwal regarding these complex tantric texts.
Oh, the tantric texts are wild. We'll get into that.
Yes, and we are placing all of this against these sweeping, epic, Puranic overviews of the Dasavatar, which is the 10 incarnations of Lord Vishnu.
So we are specifically looking at Lord Vishnu's ninth form as Gautam Buddha. And to truly understand why a weaponless avatar is such an earth-shattering concept, I mean, we can't just look at the Buddha in a vacuum.
No, you have to understand the precedent.
Right. We have to look at the cosmic timeline that actually led up to him.
To set that baseline, we need to examine the concept of cyclical time in Hindu cosmology. Unlike a linear view of history, the Puranic texts describe time moving in these vast epochs called yugas.
Kind of like a descending scale, right?
Exactly. Think of it as a descending scale of cosmic order, or dharma. You start with the Satya Yuga, which is an age of pure truth and spiritual perfection. Then you move down through the Treta Yuga and Dwapara Yuga, where morality and righteousness incrementally degrade.
So things just get progressively worse.
Yes. Until finally, you reach the Kali Yuga. This is the current age, and it's characterized by darkness, ignorance, and a sort of spiritual amnesia.
And as those yugas degrade, crises inevitably pop up, the cosmic balance just tips way too far into chaos.
That is the trigger. In the Puranic texts, there is an overarching framework called the Dashavatar. Dasha meaning 10, and avatar meaning descent or incarnation. The core concept is that Lord Vishnu, who is the supreme preserver of the universe, incarnates on Earth whenever Dharma is in a state of severe crisis.
He drops in to stabilize the system.
Precisely.
Our sources actually detail the first 8 avatars, and if you look at them conceptually, it's basically this massive escalation of martial intervention. Let's map this out for you guys, because understanding the first 8 is really the only way to grasp the shock value of the ninth.
It sets the stage perfectly.
Right, so if you look at the early crises, like the first 3 avatars, Vishnu is essentially combating massive cosmic environmental disasters.
That is a very analytical way to categorize them. So the first is Matsya, the fish. During the Satya Yuga, the texts describe this impending catastrophic deluge meant to wipe out all life.
Like a massive flood.
A global flood. Vishnu appears as a colossal fish to King Satyavrata. He instructs the king to build a massive ark, gathering the seeds of life, the sages, and the subtle bodies of creatures.
And then Matsya literally tows the boat.
Yes, when the flood hits, Matsya tows the ark to safety, using the cosmic serpent Vasuki as a rope.
So that's basically an environmental reboot. Then we get to the second avatar, Kurma, the tortoise. And this one is, well, it's like an infrastructure crisis.
A crisis triggered by a severe depletion of resources, actually. The gods have lost their power due to a curse from this volatile sage, Durvasa. To regain their immortality, they have to churn the cosmic ocean.
The Samudra Manthan.
Right, they need to extract the nectar of immortality. But the mountain they use as a churning rod, Mount Mandarakal, it starts sinking into the ocean floor.
There's no foundation for it.
Exactly. So Vishnu incarnates as Kurma, a giant tortoise, diving to the bottom of the ocean to physically support the mountain on his shell so the churning can proceed.
Which brings us to the third, Varaha, the boar. And this is where the environmental disaster meets direct physical combat, right?
It is. A demon named Hiranyaksha steals the earth and drags it deep into the cosmic ocean. Vishnu, as a massive boar, dives into the waters, engages in a brutal physical battle with the demon, kills him, and literally lifts the earth back to safety on his tusks.
So we transition from environmental rescue to direct physical confrontation. But the next 2 avatars, Narasimha and Vamana, They represent a totally different kind of warfare.
How so?
Well, they aren't just fighting brute strength anymore. They are fighting complex, legalistic loopholes.
Ah, yes. Because the nature of the crisis evolves, the antagonists become much smarter. Take the fourth avatar, Narasimha, the half-man, half-lion.
This one is wild.
It really is. The demon king Hiranyakashipu performs this intense penance to extort a highly specific boon from the universe. He demands that he cannot be killed by a man or an animal, not indoors or outdoors, not during the day or night, not on earth or in the sky, and not by any weapon.
He essentially drafts an ironclad cosmic immunity contract. He thinks he has completely hacked the system to achieve immortality.
And he uses that power to terrorize the world. He even tries to murder his own son, Prahlad, just for worshipping Vishnu.
Which requires a highly specific intervention. I mean, Vishnu cannot just show up with a sword at that point.
No, he bursts from a pillar as Narasimha, who is neither fully man nor fully animal. He attacks at twilight, which is neither day nor night.
Right on the threshold of a courtyard.
Exactly, which is neither indoors nor outdoors. He places the demon on his left, so neither earth nor sky, and he disembowels him with his claws, which are technically not classified as weapons.
He neutralizes the threat by finding the exact vulnerabilities in the fine print. It's brilliant. And we see a similar strategic bypass with the fifth avatar, Vamana the dwarf.
Yes, the demon king Bali has conquered the heavens and exiled the gods. He is actually an incredibly powerful and generous king, but his dominance upsets the cosmic balance.
So Vishnu incarnates as Vamana, a diminutive Brahmin scholar.
Right. He approaches Bali during a massive sacrifice and asks for a seemingly tiny charitable gift. Just 3 paces of land.
And Bali's advisor warns him it's a trap, but Bali is bound by his ego and his vow of charity, so he agrees.
At which point Vamana expands to cosmic proportions. His first step covers the entire earth, his second step covers the heavens. There is simply no physical space left for the third step.
So Bali realizes he has been completely outmaneuvered by the divine.
He offers his own head. Vishnu steps on Bali's head, pushing him down to the netherworld, Sutala Loka, and thereby restores the headings to the gods.
So that's dimensional conquest. We've gone from environmental disasters to loophole combat. Now the final 3 before Buddha are where the violence becomes deeply systemic and socio-political.
These are the avatars most people are highly familiar with: Rama, Krishna, and Parashurama.
Let's start with the 6th, Parashurama.
Parashurama is a warrior sage wielding an axe. His intervention occurs when the entire Kshatriya class, the ruling warriors, becomes fundamentally corrupt and tyrannical.
Specifically, this king named Sahasrabahu, right?
Yes, who burns down the ashram of Parashurama's father. Parashurama responds with a relentless systemic purge. He wipes out the corrupt ruling class from the face of the earth multiple times to reset the socio-political balance.
A literal decapitation of a corrupt hierarchy. Then we have Rama, the 7th avatar, arriving in the Treta Yuga.
Rama represents the establishment of the rule of law. The crisis here is the demon king Ravana, who represents unchecked desire and tyranny.
Rama lives a life strictly bound by duty and dharma.
And when his wife Sita is abducted, he leads a massive army to Lanka. It is a large-scale geographical war to physically destroy Ravana and restore order.
And finally, the 8th avatar, Krishna, in the Dwapara Yuga. Krishna is the ultimate master strategist.
His role is incredibly complex. He eliminates the tyrant Kansa early on, but his primary function is as the orchestrator of the Mahabharata War.
He doesn't actually fight in it, though, right?
He does not take up arms himself in that battle. Instead, he serves as the charioteer for Arjuna. He acts as the prime mover, ensuring that the righteous faction, the Pandavas, win a devastating civil war against the corrupt Kauravas.
And he delivers the Bhagavad Gita right on the battlefield, explaining the cosmic mechanics of duty.
Yes.
So let's pause and look at this entire sequence. Matsya, Kurma, Varaha, Narasimha, Vamana, Parashurama, Rama, Krishna. This is a roster of cosmic action heroes.
It is a very martial lineup.
The methodology of preserving the universe involves physical force, martial warfare, blood, and the destruction of an external enemy.
That is the established precedent, yes. The avatars utilize extraordinary power to neutralize physical manifestations of chaos.
Which brings me to the pivotal question of this entire deep dive. How do you go from orchestrating the Mahabharata War, a conflict that supposedly wiped out millions, to the 9th avatar?
It's a jarring transition.
It really is. Why does Lord Vishnu's 9th form as Gautam Buddha suddenly drop the weapons, wear a simple robe, and just sit quietly under a tree? What was the crisis that required such a massive deviation in strategy?
The answer lies in the nature of the progression of the yugas we discussed earlier. As society moved further toward the Kali Yuga, the crisis facing the world fundamentally changed.
It wasn't physical anymore.
Exactly. The threat was no longer a giant demon stealing the earth or a tyrant conquering the heavens. The crisis had become entirely internal.
Okay, elaborate on that for us. What does an internal cosmic crisis actually look like on the ground?
The sources describe a society that was drowning in intellectual and spiritual stagnation. The orthodox religious systems of the time had become hyper-focused on rigid, mechanical rituals.
Just going through the motions.
And worse, there was a massive proliferation of animal sacrifices and complex dogmas that entirely alienated the common people. The demon of this specific age was spiritual blindness. It was violence and exclusion being committed under the guise of religion.
So an avatar wielding a physical weapon would be completely useless. You can't decapitate ignorance with an axe.
You have to conquer the mind. The weapon becomes compassion, nonviolence, and a profound disruption of the psychological status quo.
Which is exactly what the Buddha does. But Dr. Vineet Agarwal's analysis of the scriptural texts introduces a really fascinating layer of complexity here.
Yes, the textual debate.
When we look at the Puranas, the ancient Hindu texts that list the Dashavatar, it is not as simple as taking the historical Prince Siddhartha Gautama and pasting his biography into the scriptures.
There is a robust theological debate about which Buddha the Puranas are actually referenced.
All right, because the details don't entirely match up with the historical record.
They do not. Dr. Agarwal notes that some specific Puranic scriptures mention a Buddha born in a place called Kikat, which correlates to modern-day Gaya. Furthermore, these texts list his father's name as Arjant, or Anjan,
which is entirely different from the historical father of Siddhartha, King Shuddhodana of Kapilavastu.
Because of these distinct discrepancies, a faction of scholars argues that the Puranic Buddha is a completely different entity from the historical Siddhartha Gautama. They argue it is a separate mythological figure.
But Dr. Agarwal provides some context for that.
He does. In Hindu cosmology, because time is cyclical over millions of years, the scriptures often document multiple Buddhas emerging across different timelines and different yugas, each serving a highly specific, localized purpose.
But regardless of whether the text is referring to a previous cyclical Buddha or prophesying the historical Siddhartha, the underlying theological mechanism is identical.
Exactly identical.
Lord Vishnu's ninth form as Gautam Buddha is recognized as a divine descent explicitly meant to reorient a corrupted spiritual practice.
That is the core takeaway. And the sources provide a deeply esoteric tantric connection that perfectly illustrates just how radically this Buddha figure was needed to break the orthodox stagnation.
I love this story. It's from the Rudrayamala Tantra.
It addresses the exact crisis of rigid rituals we just outlined. According to this tantric text, Brahmarishi Vasishtha, who is arguably one of the most elite, revered, and orthodox sages in the entire Hindu tradition, has been performing intense, agonizing penance for thousands of years.
Thousands of years of perfect orthodox rituals.
Yes, his goal is to please the supreme goddess. Some textual variations place him near the Kamakya temple in modern Assam, others place him near the ocean.
But the geography is secondary to the outcome, which is that he completely fails. The goddess completely ignores him.
And Vasishtha, displaying a profound lack of the very enlightenment he is seeking, becomes furious. Frustrated by his failure, he curses the location itself.
He throws a cosmic temper tantrum.
He does. He decrees that nobody will ever successfully worship at this place. The texts describe the Kamakya temple area subsequently becoming completely overgrown with thick vegetation lost to the world.
Because his methodology didn't yield a result, he just ruins it for everyone.
But that temper tantrum finally provokes a response. The goddess appears to him. Not to grant him a boon, though. She appears to heavily rebuke him.
Oh, she tells him off.
She informs Vasishtha that his entire methodological approach is fundamentally flawed. His rigid, traditional, orthodox penance is useless for attaining the ultimate realization he seeks.
She tells him his rituals are essentially dead ends.
Yeah.
And then she gives him a set of instructions that absolutely shatter his orthodox conditioning.
She instructs Brahmarishi Vasishtha that if he truly desires to learn the correct spiritual path, specifically the Vamarg path, he must travel to the Mahajan or Tibet area.
We need to define the Valmark path for a second for everyone listening, because that makes the goddess's command even more shocking.
Yeah,
Valmark is the left-hand tantric path.
it is.
It deliberately involves breaking orthodox taboos and moving beyond the rigid concepts of purity and pollution that define the Brahminical system Vashish championed.
It is a radical psychological deconditioning. And who does the goddess tell this elite Orthodox sage to learn this radical path from?
She tells him to go learn from Buddha Swarup.
Yes, Buddha Swarup, meaning Vishnu residing in the form of Buddha.
Dr. Agarwal notes that while academic debates persist on whether this refers directly to the historical Buddha or a spiritual representative, many tantric texts explicitly state it was Vishnu in the form of Buddha.
Vashisht is forced to travel there, humble his massive ego, and learn an entirely new, heterodox spiritual method.
Wait, let's look at this critically for a second. Are we sure this isn't just a later Hindu text trying to retroactively claim the Buddha? Like a sort of theological retcon to say, oh, your brilliant rebel leader was actually just our god all along?
That is a very valid historical critique. Sociologists certainly argue that absorbing rival figures is a common mechanism for theological survival. However, within the internal logic of the text itself, it functions as a profound admission of failure. The Tantric text is openly acknowledging that the elite Orthodox system had reached a point of absolute stagnation. It is stating that the rebel philosophy, the path of the Buddha, held the necessary key to unlocking true spiritual realization that the old Vedas could no longer access.
Ah, so it validates the Buddha not as an enemy of the old ways, but as the necessary corrective evolution of them. Lord Vishnu's ninth form as Gautam Buddha was deployed to save the religion from its own practitioners.
It frames his mission as a crucial psychological course correction. But to truly understand how this ninth avatar operated, we have to pull back from the macro mythology and the tantric texts.
We have to look at the human being.
We have to examine the historical, psychological reality of the figure who inspired this massive theological integration.
We have to look at the sheltered prince. Let's shift our timeline to roughly 563 BC. We are in northern India, near the foothills of the Himalayas, in a state called Kapilastu.
It is important to contextualize Kapilavastu. The sources describe it not as a massive, absolute, tyrannical monarchy, but rather as a semi-republican state.
Governed by the Shakya clan.
Yes. The ruler, King Shuddhodana, did not rule with unquestioned divine right tyranny. Major political and economic decisions were often debated and influenced by an assembly of the leading aristocratic families.
So it was a highly organized, prosperous, and culturally rich society.
And it is within this prosperous society that Queen Maya Devi, who hails from the neighboring Koliya dynasty, experiences a highly symbolic, prophetic dream.
She dreams of a radiant white elephant entering her womb.
In the deep cultural and astrological context of ancient India, this was not just a strange dream. It was an extremely auspicious omen.
The royal astrologers and elite Brahmins were summoned.
And they interpreted it to mean that an entity of extraordinary cosmic significance was about to be born.
The birth occurs while Queen Maya Devi is traveling to her maternal home. She stops in a lush grove called Lumbini, and there the prince is born. He is named Siddhartha.
A name carrying profound intent. It means he whose purpose is fulfilled.
King Shuddhodana is ecstatic. He has an heir. He throws these massive celebrations across the Shakya Republic. He invites the greatest scholars and holy men to bless the child and map out his astrological destiny.
Among them is a very old, highly revered ascetic named Asita.
And the encounter with Asita is one of the foundational psychological markers of this whole narrative.
Asita examines the infant Siddhartha. Initially, his face breaks into a radiant, joyous smile. But almost instantaneously, that smile collapses, and the old sage begins to weep uncontrollably.
King Shuddhodana demands to know why the sage is crying on the most joyous day of the king's life. And Asita delivers a prophecy that basically creates a schism in the king's mind.
Asita explains that the physical markers on the child indicate two violently opposed potential destinies. He tells the king, if this boy remains in the palace, if he engages with the material world and secular power, he will become a Chakravartin.
Which is a legendary world-conquering emperor who will unite the lands.
Which is exactly what a king wants to hear.
But there's a massive however coming.
A huge however. Asita continues, however, if this child ever truly sees the sorrow and suffering of the world, he will renounce his claim to the throne.
He will drop everything.
He will drop everything and become a great ascetic, a supreme spiritual leader who will discover the path to universal liberation.
So the king asks the obvious question, why are you crying? Both of those destinies sound incredible.
And Asita's reason for weeping is deeply personal and tragic. He explains that he is weeping because of his own mortality. He realizes he is simply too old,
He knows he will die long before the boy grows up.
which means he will permanently miss out on hearing the profound spiritual teachings this child is destined to deliver. He is mourning his own inability to be saved by the boy.
It's such a heavy moment. But King Shuddhodana completely glosses over the spiritual liberation aspect. I mean, as a politician and a father, he fixates entirely on the threat of his son renouncing the throne.
His reaction is absolute systemic panic. He requires an heir to maintain the stability of the Shakya Republic. A wandering monk is politically useless to him.
So the king decides to artificially engineer his son's environment to cheat destiny. He builds what is historically referred to as the golden cage.
The king issues a strict decree. Siddhartha must be kept entirely ignorant of human suffering, decay, and death.
Our sources detail the extreme, almost pathological lengths the king went to in order to enforce this isolation. He constructs 3 separate palace complexes for the prince, one optimized for the summer, one for the winter, and one for the monsoon season.
The environment was a heavily curated illusion. It was a sterilized reality. No sad sights were permitted within the palace walls. The elderly, the sick, the dying, even dead leaves in the garden, all were meticulously removed before the prince could see them.
He was surrounded exclusively by youth, beauty, music, and endless celebration.
But he isn't just lounging around. He is given a top-tier elite education. He studies complex philosophy, statecraft, and multiple languages. He is rigorously trained in the martial arts, like archery, swordsmanship, cavalry.
By all accounts, he's brilliant, a physical and intellectual prodigy. But all of that brilliance is operating inside a vacuum.
The king's strategy was to bind the prince to the material world through overwhelming pleasure and obligation. Siddhartha is married at a young age to a brilliant and beautiful princess, Nashatara. They eventually conceive a son, whom they name Rahula.
To the outside observer, it is the zenith of human achievement, the perfect frictionless life.
They lead.
I always connect this golden cage to how we live today. You know, we might not have 3 palaces, but modern society is obsessed with building its own golden cages. We spend billions on anti-aging creams to hide getting older. We heavily curate our social media to only show the highlights, filtering out any sadness or failure.
That is an incredibly sharp modern parallel.
Right. We physically separate the sick and the elderly into care facilities so we don't have to look at decline on a daily basis. Shuddhodana's strategy isn't ancient. It's exactly how modern culture tries to avoid existential dread.
We attempt to sanitize reality to avoid psychological discomfort. But the fundamental problem with sanitizing reality is that reality always leaks through. The human mind, especially a highly analytical mind like Siddhartha's, is not built to accept a frictionless existence without eventually searching for the boundaries of that existence. The sources note an inherent deep-seated sensitivity in the prince that the luxuries could not numb.
And we see a massive crack in the illusion during a specific event. This is an agricultural festival.
Yes, the plowing festival. This is a critical psychological inflection point.
The entire kingdom is out celebrating. It's a joyous event marking the beginning of the planting season, predicting future prosperity and food. Siddhartha is sitting under a rose apple tree, observing the process.
He watches a farmer driving a heavy plow through a field.
As the sharp metal blade turns over the dark soil, Siddhartha doesn't see future prosperity. He sees the immediate visceral violence occurring in the dirt. He sees worms and insects being sliced in half by the blade or being exposed to the harsh sun, only to be immediately swooped down upon and eaten by birds.
While the rest of the society is focused on the macroeconomic benefit, the harvest Siddhartha's focus zeroes in on the micro-suffering required to achieve it.
He experiences a profound cognitive dissonance.
He realizes that his own survival, his own food, is entirely dependent on a systemic cycle of violence and death.
It shatters the sterilized illusion. He feels a deep, agonizing distress over the suffering of these tiny, insignificant creatures.
That distress is the genesis of his universal compassion. He returns to the palace, but the architecture of his reality has been compromised. The music, the dancing, the fine silk, it all begins to feel incredibly heavy and false.
The seed of doubt regarding the nature of existence has been planted, and it begins to fester. He starts to realize that he doesn't actually know what exists beyond the walls of his curated gardens. The golden cage morphs from a sanctuary into a prison.
Which inevitably sets the stage for the moment the illusion completely collapses. The prince insists, he absolutely demands to take his chariot outside the palace walls and into the actual city of Kapilvastu.
The king is terrified. He knows the prophecy. But he also knows he cannot keep a grown, highly educated prince confined indefinitely without inciting rebellion.
So, the king tries to rig the game one last time. He issues a royal decree to stage manage the entire city.
He orders the streets to be scrubbed clean. He commands that anyone who is sick, elderly, deformed, or grieving must be hidden entirely from view. The citizens lining the streets are ordered to look universally happy, prosperous, and young.
It is a desperate, massive theatrical production to maintain the lie, but reality cannot be legislated. Despite the king's extreme measures, the chaotic nature of life breaks through the staging.
Siddhartha takes this fateful chariot ride with his trusted charioteer, Channa, and what they encounter on that road are known historically and theologically as the foresights.
These aren't just things he saw, these are world-shattering psychological events for a man whose brain has never had to process the concept of decay.
Precisely. Let us break down the psychological impact of each sight. Sight number one. As the chariot moves through the cheering crowds, Siddhartha's eyes lock onto a figure that defies everything he knows about the human body. He sees a man bent entirely over, his spine curved, leaning heavily on a cane just to stay upright.
The man's hair is sparse and white, his skin is deeply lined and sagging, and his mouth is devoid of teeth.
Siddhartha is utterly bewildered. He has never seen a human body in a state of decay. He turns to his charioteer, Channa, and asks, "What is wrong with this man? Why is his body so broken and fragile?"
And Channa, caught between the king's wrath and his duty to the prince, chooses to tell the brutal truth. He says, "Prince, this is old age. It is not a unique curse. It happens to everyone. It will happen to me, and inevitably, it will happen to you."
The sources describe Siddhartha being physically struck by this information. The realization that youth is not a permanent state, that his own muscular, highly trained warrior body is mathematically guaranteed to wither and decay. It destroys his foundational premise of physical security.
He is processing the absolute impermanence of the physical form for the first time.
The chariot continues, and the psychological assault escalates with the second sight. They encounter a man collapsed on the side of the road.
The man is covered in weeping sores, burning with a violent fever, and crying out in immense, uncontrollable pain.
Again, Siddhartha has no framework for this. He asks Channa what is happening. Channa explains the concept of disease and illness. He explains that health is incredibly fragile.
It is a temporary state that can be shattered at any moment by invisible forces for any person, completely regardless of their wealth, their moral standing, or their royal blood.
The illusion of biological safety is now gone. And then, the third sight delivers the final, inescapable absolute. They encounter a procession of people walking slowly, weeping uncontrollably. They are carrying a wooden bier, and lying on it is a body wrapped in cloth, completely motionless.
"Why is he so still?" Siddhartha asks. "Why doesn't he wake up to the crying?"
And Channa delivers the hardest truth a human can hear. He says, "He is dead, Prince. His life is permanently over. His body will be burned. And this is the inevitable end waiting for all of us, the king, the peasant, and you. No one escapes death."
Put yourself in Siddhartha's psychological state at that moment. In the span of a single afternoon, the entire operating system of his reality has crashed. He suddenly understands that every single moment of joy, love, or pleasure he has ever experienced in the palace is heavily shadowed by the absolute, non-negotiable certainty of disease, decay, and death.
He is forced to ask a terrifying philosophical question. If the end result of every attachment is always suffering and loss, what is the point of engaging in temporary pleasure?
It is the ultimate existential crisis. He is staring into the abyss of nihilism.
But before he completely despairs and breaks down, the universe provides the fourth sight. Amidst the chaos, the disease, and the mourning of the city, Siddhartha sees a lone man walking with incredibly slow, deliberate, mindful steps.
He wears a simple, rough robe, he carries nothing but a begging bowl, and his face is an absolute picture of unshakable serenity.
The contrast is jarring. Siddhartha asks Channa how a man can look so peaceful in a world defined by the previous three sights.
Channa explains that this man is a shramana, an ascetic. He is a man who has recognized the inherent suffering of the world, dropped all material and social attachments, and dedicated his entire existence to finding a way out of the cycle of birth, death, and suffering.
That serene face is the lifeline. Siddhartha looks at the old man, the sick man, and the corpse, and he perfectly diagnoses the problem. Then he looks at the ascetic, and he sees a potential methodology for a solution.
He returns to the palace, but the transition is irreversible. The sources describe the previously intoxicating music, the dancing women, and the luxuries feeling like oppressive chains.
The palace has become a graveyard to him. The text highlights a deeply visceral, agonizing moment that night. Siddhartha has just had a son, Rahula. He goes into the royal chambers and looks at his newborn child.
But instead of feeling the simple, pure joy of a new father, his mind is flooded with the crushing weight of the foresights.
He looks at the infant and realizes that his intense biological love for this child is actually a bond of future suffering. He realizes that eventually and inevitably, one of them will have to watch the other die.
It is a terrifying level of hyper-awareness. He recognizes that attachment guarantees grief, and it forces him to make the ultimate agonizing calculation. He realizes that he cannot possibly find the cure for human suffering while sitting on a throne, comfortably insulated by the very illusions of power and permanence he needs to dismantle.
And so begins the Mahabhinishramana, the great departure. In the dead of night, while the entire palace is asleep, Siddhartha walks into his wife's chamber. Princess Yashodhara and baby Rahula are fast asleep.
He deeply desires to pick up his son one last time, to hold him. But his analytical mind knows that if Yashodhara wakes up, the emotional gravity of the situation will be too strong.
The biological imperative to stay and protect his family will override his universal mission. He knows he won't be able to leave.
I want you, the listener, to really pause and analyze the sheer, terrifying willpower that moment required. He is not leaving because he hates his family or is bored with his life.
Right.
He is leaving because his love for them has expanded to a point where he is desperate to find a way to permanently save them and all of humanity from the inevitable crushing pain of existence. He turns his back on ultimate comfort, ultimate political power, and the family he loves.
He recognizes that a local solution, being a good king to a small republic, is insufficient for a universal problem. So he leaves the palace, accompanied only by Channa and his horse, Kantaka. They ride hard, far into the night, putting distance between himself and his past, until they reach the banks of the Anoma River.
And here we see the physical, symbolic severing of his identity. He takes off his heavy, jeweled royal robes. He trades them for the simple, coarse orange clothes of a wandering ascetic.
He draws his heavy warrior's sword and uses it to violently cut off his long, princely hair. He hands the jewels, the weapons, and the horse to a weeping Channa, commanding him to return to Kapilavastu and inform the king that the prince is gone.
From this exact moment forward, Prince Siddhartha of Kapilavastu ceases to exist. He is entirely alone in the deep forests of ancient India, completely stripped of his royal identity, his wealth, his military protection, and his social security.
The former prince must now find a teacher who can explain the mechanics of suffering. So, the newly minted ascetic heads into the wilderness to seek out the absolute greatest spiritual minds of his era.
According to the historical texts, he finds and studies under two highly renowned yogic masters. First, he apprentices under Alara Kalama and subsequently under Uddaka Ramaputta.
And these were elite practitioners of deep, formless yogic meditation.
Yes. And Siddhartha is an intellectual and spiritual prodigy. He doesn't just passively learn their techniques, he completely masters them.
He rapidly achieves the absolute highest states of deep trance, the formless spheres of meditation that these masters are capable of teaching. He equals their realization.
But then he hits a massive analytical roadblock.
What is fascinating here is his rigorous empirical approach to spirituality. He analyzes his own mind. He realizes that these incredibly deep meditative trances are profoundly peaceful while he is inside them. But the critical flaw is that they are temporary.
The moment his concentration breaks, the moment he comes out of the meditation, the reality of the world, the suffering, the decay, the inevitable death is still sitting right there, waiting for him.
I look at it like taking a powerful painkiller for a severely broken bone. The medication makes the pain disappear for 4 hours, you feel great, but the bone is still fundamentally broken.
That is an excellent analogy for the limitations of temporary meditative states. The meditation was just a temporary mental escape hatch. It wasn't a structural cure for the human condition.
He realizes the answer isn't just in escaping consciousness, so he leaves his teachers. He swings the pendulum of his methodology to the absolute opposite extreme. He travels to a place called Uruvela, situated near the Niranjana River.
There, he aligns himself with 5 other ascetics who are practicing the dominant, hardcore philosophy of the time.
And their philosophy is essentially, the physical body is the enemy. The body is an obstacle to the spirit.
Yeah.
Therefore, to purify the eternal soul, you have to brutally, relentlessly punish the physical form.
It is the path of extreme self-mortification. And Siddhartha, driven by his desperate need for an answer, commits to this path with a terrifying, almost suicidal intensity for 6 agonizing years.
The texts are incredibly graphic about the trauma he subjected his body to. The details in our sources are hard to even read. He starves himself intentionally.
At times, he restricts his diet to a single grain of rice or a single sesame seed a day.
Sometimes he survives purely on drops of water. He completely stops bathing. He sits motionless in the scorching Indian summer sun and remains exposed during the freezing winter nights. He holds his breath until he experiences violent physical pain.
He essentially reduces himself to a living skeleton. The texts describe his limbs looking like knotted bamboo. It states that if he pressed his hand against his stomach, he could physically feel his own spine.
He is constantly operating on the absolute brink of starvation and systemic organ failure, barely retaining enough energy to even stand upright.
But the suffering isn't yielding results. The physical pain isn't bringing him any closer to a profound cosmic truth.
In fact, his mind is becoming incredibly foggy and degraded from the severe lack of basic nutrients. And then one day, lying near death in the dirt, he experiences a massive, paradigm-shifting aha moment.
In a state of extreme physical depletion, a memory spontaneously surfaces. He recalls that day from his childhood at the agricultural festival when he watched the plowing.
He remembers sitting quietly under the rose apple tree.
He wasn't starving himself, he wasn't punishing his flesh, but his mind had naturally, effortlessly slipped into a state of profound, clear, and immensely joyful concentration.
He realizes the physical torture is a massive dead end. If the brain is starved of calories and basic biology is failing, the mind cannot possibly achieve the rigorous clarity needed to decode the universe.
He runs an analysis on his entire life up to this point. He tried extreme indulgence in the palace, and it was a trap of sensory illusion. He tried extreme physical deprivation in the forest, and it was essentially just a slow, painful suicide.
Neither extreme works. The true methodology is the integration of both. It is the middle path. I always try to visualize this using the physics of a guitar string.
A very apt metaphor.
If the string is too loose, which represents the self-indulgent, luxurious life in the palace, it won't produce any sound when you pluck it. It's totally useless for making music.
Right.
But if you take that peg and wind the string incredibly tight, representing the 6 years of brutal starvation and tension the moment you try to play it, the string violently snaps. The instrument breaks.
The only way to produce the music of profound awareness is to tune the string perfectly in the middle. Just enough physical tension to create resonance, but not so much that it destroys the vehicle.
That is the exact neurological balance he was seeking. The physical body must be sustained, respected, and kept healthy, not for vanity, but to serve as a highly functional vehicle for the mind's eventual awakening.
So he makes a radical, deeply controversial choice. He accepts a bowl of kheer, a rich, highly nourishing rice pudding boiled in milk offered by a local village woman named Sujata.
And this pragmatic choice immediately cost him his entire social support system. The 5 ascetics he has suffered alongside for 6 years are absolutely disgusted by him eating the pudding.
Within their rigid philosophical framework, they believe he has broken his sacred vows, surrendered to gluttony, and fundamentally failed in his spiritual quest. They abandon him in the forest immediately.
But Siddhartha doesn't care about their judgment anymore. He is finally nourished, his mind is clearing, he is strong, and he is entirely alone once again.
He walks to a massive peepal tree, which history now reveres as the Bodhi tree. He sits down beneath its massive canopy, crosses his legs in the lotus position, and makes a final, earth-shattering vow.
He says, "Even if my flesh and blood dry up, leaving only skin and bones, I will not rise from this spot until I have found the ultimate truth of existence."
And thus begins the Night of Enlightenment. The narrative transitions from a historical struggle into a profound psychological epic, because the moment he makes that absolute vow, the battle begins. He faces his greatest and final opponent, Mara.
This is where we see Lord Vishnu's 9th form, as Gautam Buddha, engage in the warfare he was designed for. But this isn't a demon stealing the earth.
Exactly. We need to explain the Buddhist concept of Mara. While often depicted in art as a literal demon lord, psychologically, Mara is the personification of the human brain's evolutionary survival mechanisms. Mara is fear, doubt, the illusion of the ego, and the desperate temptation of desire.
Mara is the internal architecture that keeps us bound to suffering. And our sources describe Mara launching a full-scale, desperate assault to break Siddhartha's concentration.
He attacks with fear first, sending terrifying visions of demonic armies, violent storms, and flaming rocks raining from the sky.
But when the terror fails, Mara pivots to temptation. He sends his beautiful daughters who represent craving, lust, and desire to seduce Siddhartha and pull him back into sensory attachment.
But Siddhartha's defense mechanism is entirely passive. He remains perfectly, absolutely still. He recognizes that Mara's armies and daughters are not external physical threats. They are internal projections generated by his own mind.
By refusing to react to them, by simply observing them with perfect detached clarity, he completely neutralizes their power.
He conquers the mind by refusing to fight with it. He short-circuits the reactivity, and as the night progresses and the mental attacks fade, the texts describe his consciousness expanding rapidly through what are called the 3 watches of the night.
In the first watch, his mind achieves such an immense level of clarity that he gains the ability to see all of his past lives. He witnesses the endless, exhausting cycle of birth, death, and rebirth.
He no longer sees consciousness as a single, isolated 70-year lifetime, but as a continuous flowing stream of energy across millions of years.
In the second watch, he moves beyond observing the cycle and actually sees the underlying mechanism that drives it. He understands the absolute law of karma.
He sees clearly how the specific actions, intentions, and ethical choices of beings strictly bind them to their future circumstances. He realizes karma is not a cosmic judge handing out punishments. It is an impersonal law of spiritual physics, cause and effect.
And then comes the third watch, the ultimate breakthrough. He drills down past the karma and discovers the absolute root cause of all human suffering. He identifies the specific psychological pathogen. He calls it Trishna.
Trishna translates to craving, thirst, or attachment. It is the unquenchable, desperate desire for things to be different than they currently are.
It's the friction. It's the desire for sensory pleasure, the desire to run away from pain, and the desperate attachment to a permanent self or ego in a universe where everything is constantly changing and degrading.
Exactly. And this profound realization crystallizes into the core thesis of his entire philosophy, the Four Noble Truths. This is the structural bedrock of the cure he was looking for.
Let's break these down not just as list items, but as psychological mechanisms. Truth number 1. Life is inherently characterized by suffering, or dukkha. This doesn't mean life is entirely miserable, but that it is fundamentally unsatisfying.
Sickness, old age, death, not getting what you want, getting what you don't want, it's baked into the biological operating system.
Truth number 2. This suffering is caused by desire, by Trishna, the psychological friction between how we demand the world to be and how the world actually is.
Yes.
Truth number 3. End the desire, and you end the suffering. If you can completely let go of the craving and the attachment to outcomes, the psychological agony stops immediately, even if the physical pain of existence remains.
And truth number 4. The actual methodology to achieve this cessation is the Eightfold Path. It's not magic. It's a systematic cognitive behavioral guide to rewiring how you think, act, and meditate.
And as he fully comprehends these 4 truths, daybreak arrives. The sun rises, and the last remnants of ignorance vanish completely from his mind. He is no longer Siddhartha the confused prince or Siddhartha the starving ascetic. He becomes the Buddha.
The awakened one.
He has solved the cosmic puzzle. But what is structurally crucial here is that a Buddha, by his very definition, cannot keep this profound realization to himself.
Out of pure, overwhelming compassion, the weaponless avatar must now deploy his divine knowledge to heal the world. He has to disseminate the cure.
He has to go to work. The sources tell us his very first move is to track down the 5 ascetics who had abandoned him in disgust. He walks all the way to a deer park at Sarnath to find them.
At first, seeing him approach, they resolve to ignore him. But the texts say his presence is so radiantly peaceful, so completely transformed that their conditioning breaks, and they instinctively rise to serve him and wash his feet.
There, he delivers his first public sermon, a monumental event known as the Dharmachakra Pravartana, the setting in motion of the wheel of Dharma.
He systematically teaches them the middle path and the Four Noble Truths. They instantly realize the truth of his words, become his first enlightened disciples, and a massive, world-altering spiritual movement is born.
And as he travels the ancient roads of India teaching this path, we see exactly how Lord Vishnu's 9th form as Gautam Buddha operates in the real world. He doesn't use divine weapons to smite evil people. He uses extreme, radical compassion to fundamentally reformat the minds of violent people.
The story of Angulimala from our sources is the absolute perfect example of this psychological warfare. It is a brilliant, terrifying illustration of his method. Angulimala was an infamous, deeply feared bandit who haunted the roads of the Kosala kingdom. His name literally translates to finger necklace.
He earned that name because he would ruthlessly murder travelers, cut off one of their fingers, and add it to a rotting garland he wore around his neck. He's a serial killer.
The locals were absolutely terrified. Entire villages were abandoned just because he was rumored to be nearby. People desperately warned the Buddha not to walk down the road entering that forest.
But the Buddha walks down the road anyway, completely alone, walking at a slow pace, and completely unarmed. Angulimala spots this lone, seemingly defenseless monk and assumes it is an incredibly easy kill to add to his necklace. He grabs his weapons and sprints after the Buddha.
But here is where the story describes a profound distortion of reality. The Buddha is just walking at a normal, exceptionally calm pace. Angulimala is running as fast as his physically powerful body can manage, sprinting with a drawn sword, but no matter how fast he runs, he cannot seem to close the distance between them.
Finally, physically exhausted, drenched in sweat, and furious at the impossibility of the situation, Angulimala screams out, "Stop, ascetic, stop."
And the Buddha does not even turn around. He simply replies in a steady, perfectly calm voice, "I have already stopped, Angulimala. I have stopped forever. It is you who are still running."
Angulimala is totally confused by the paradox. He yells back, "What do you mean you stopped? I can see your legs moving. You're still walking."
And the Buddha turns, looks the serial killer in the eyes, and says, "I have stopped committing violence against all living beings. I have stopped the agitation of my mind. My mind is entirely still. It is your mind that is racing in endless violence, cruelty, and exhaustion."
If we analyze this event by connecting it back to the Puranic avatar framework we discussed in part 1,
Right, think about Parashurama with his axe, or Narasimha with his claws. If a serial killer like Angulimala had run at them with a sword, they would have physically decapitated or disemboweled him in a fraction of a second, threat neutralized through superior violence.
precisely the contrast we need to see. The ninth avatar neutralizes the threat by transforming the mind of the aggressor. The Buddha doesn't fight Angulimala physically. He creates a massive cognitive dissonance.
He executes a psychological pattern interrupt. The sheer force of the Buddha's fearless, unshakable compassion completely short-circuits Angulimala's fight-or-flight conditioning. The bandit is so overwhelmed by the realization of his own internal chaos compared to the Buddha's peace that he drops his weapons, falls to his knees in the dirt, and begs to become a monk.
He transforms from a mass murderer to an enlightened disciple. It is a total victory without a single drop of blood being spilled.
There is another incredible interaction from the sources that highlights this psychological mastery and is so incredibly practical for your everyday life. It's the story of the unaccepted gift.
Yes, as the Buddhist movement grew massively in popularity, drawing kings and wealthy merchants, it naturally provoked intense professional jealousy and anger among rival religious leaders who were losing their followers.
One day, a deeply angry man approaches the Buddha while he is sitting peacefully and teaching. The man begins hurling the most vicious, hateful, personal insults at him. He screams, curses at him for hours, trying to provoke a reaction.
And the Buddha just sits there, listening patiently, completely unbothered, not defending himself at all. Finally, the angry man runs out of breath, his throat raw, and he demands to know why the Buddha isn't reacting to the abuse.
The Buddha looks at him and asks a very simple, logical question. If you offer a physical gift to someone and that person refuses to accept it, who does the gift belong to?
The man, likely confused by the shift in topic, says, "Well, if they don't take it, it still belongs to me, the giver."
And the Buddha replies, "Exactly. You have just spent hours offering me your anger, your hatred, and your insults, but I do not accept them. Therefore, they remain entirely yours to carry."
I mean, that is just a masterclass in psychological boundary setting.
Yeah.
Think about that for you listening right now. Think about how often we let someone else's bad day, their road rage, their passive-aggressive email at work, completely ruin our own mood.
We absorb it completely.
We are constantly, willingly accepting gifts of toxic emotional garbage that we simply do not have to take. The Buddha is demonstrating that true invincibility isn't about having an impenetrable shield. It's about making the active choice not to participate in the attack.
It is the zenith of profound self-mastery. However, we must analyze the macro effects of this philosophy. As this movement grew rapidly, as more and more people from all walks of life, from ruling kings to common laborers, became inspired to drop everything, abandon their societal roles, and become wandering monks following this radical path of compassion, it began to create significant, massive sociological and economic friction.
Right. Which brings us to the final, critical piece of Dr. Vineet Agarwal's analysis in our sources, exploring the great philosophical synthesis and the inherent friction between the heterodox Buddhist traditions and the orthodox Hindu societal structures.
We have to look at the severe structural differences in how these two systems operated. Buddhism, and similarly Jainism, were heterodox philosophies. They promoted what Dr. Agarwal terms sudden asceticism. The teaching was highly radical. The moment you realize the truth of suffering, the moment you are inspired, you immediately drop everything.
You leave your family, you abandon your career, you renounce your wealth, and you become a celibate monk to seek nirvana, just as the Buddha himself did when he left the palace.
But the Orthodox Hindu system operated on a fundamentally different, much slower model. They advocated for the ashrama dharma, a highly structured, four-stage life plan that integrated spirituality with civic duty.
Right, it was a holistic, gradual approach to ultimate salvation. The first stage is brahmacharya, the student phase where you remain celibate, learn the scriptures, and build discipline.
But the second stage is grihastha, the householder phase. This is the critical difference. In this phase, you are expected to marry, have a family, pursue a career, earn money, and actively enjoy the physical and material pleasures of life while contributing to society.
You actually have to live in the messy world and contribute to the economy.
Yes. The third stage is vanaprastha, a gradual withdrawal. Once your children are grown and stable, you start detaching from worldly duties and handing over responsibilities to the next generation. And only then, in the final stage sannyasa, do you embrace complete asceticism and renunciation, focusing entirely on moksha or ultimate liberation.
So you have Buddhism saying, the house is on fire with suffering, drop everything and run out the door right now. And Hinduism saying, yes, the house has issues, but take the stairs, check the rooms, pay the mortgage, and exit calmly when you are in your old age.
That is a vivid summation of the conflict. And the friction wasn't just a polite theological debate. It was deeply practical and heavily economic.
This is a point Dr. Agarwal makes that shifted my entire perspective because it's so grounded in reality. If everyone gets inspired by the Buddha's teachings and suddenly becomes a wandering celibate monk, human society literally collapses. Who is planting the wheat? Who is paying the taxes to maintain the roads? Who is guarding the borders of the kingdom from invasion if all the soldiers take a vow of nonviolence?
It is a fundamental issue of societal sustainability. A functioning human society physically requires a massive working population involved in secular economic pursuits. And here is the crucial, unavoidable dependency. An ascetic monk does not earn money, and they do not farm. They rely entirely on the daily charity of others for their basic caloric survival.
Therefore, for a monastic community to survive, there must be a thriving, prosperous householder class, a grihastha willing and economically able to put food in their begging bowls.
It's a completely symbiotic ecosystem. The monks provide deep spiritual guidance and psychological peace, but the householders literally keep the monks biologically alive. If you successfully convert all the tax-paying householders into monks, everyone starves to death. The cure destroys the host.
That aligns with the historical realities the texts note. Over the subsequent centuries, the masses in India naturally gravitated back toward the Hindu model of ashrama dharma. It provided a necessary practical framework that allowed for a full human experience, career, family, romance, civic duty, while still incorporating the ultimate goal of spiritual liberation at the end of life.
But the Orthodox system couldn't just ignore the massive philosophical upgrades the Buddha had introduced. There were intense, centuries-long philosophical debates. The sources specifically highlight figures like Adi Shankaracharya in the 8th century and the later massive bhakti devotional movements. They actively engaged with Buddhist philosophy.
They did. Shankaracharya was an absolute master at debating the complex nuances of consciousness. A core debate was between the Hindu concept of Atman, an eternal, unchanging, permanent soul, and the Buddhist concept of Atman, the idea of non-self, that consciousness is a constantly changing stream with no permanent core.
But wait, if their core views on the soul were so diametrically opposed, how did they ever synthesize? Wasn't that just a brilliant Machiavellian political maneuver by the Orthodox elite? If you can't beat the rebel philosophy, you just co-opt their founder, absorb their ethics, and claim he was your god all along.
That is exactly how many sociologists view it. It is akin to a massive corporate acquisition in the realm of theology. Advaita Vedanta, the dominant Hindu philosophical school, ultimately absorbed many of the core ethical, nonviolent, and psychological insights of the Buddhist traditions, weaving them into their own framework.
Which brings us full circle to our impartial conclusion based on the sources. It's not about determining that one side was empirically wrong and the other was right. Both systems fundamentally aimed at the exact same ultimate goal, the cessation of suffering, breaking the endless cycle of rebirth, whether you choose to label that destination moksha or nirvana.
Precisely. Hinduism offered a gradual, structured societal progression, ensuring the economic and structural survival of the community across generations. Buddhism offered a radical, sudden awakening, prioritizing immediate psychological liberation from suffering.
In the end, the vast, absorptive sponge of Hindu theology integrated the Buddha's most vital teachings. And the ultimate, undeniable sign of this philosophical integration was elevating Gautam Buddha to the exact center of their cosmic pantheon, designating him as the ninth avatar of Lord Vishnu.
They took the radical rebel who walked entirely away from their ancient Vedic rituals, and they placed him on a highest possible divine pedestal.
It speaks to the undeniable efficacy of his psychological methodology. The historical Buddha spent 45 years continuously walking across northern India, relentlessly teaching this precise path of mindful awareness and radical compassion.
The historical texts record that he reached his Mahaparinirvana, his final passing and ultimate release from the physical body, in a place called Kushinagar at the age of 80.
His physical journey ended, but his psychological revolution obviously permanently altered the trajectory of human thought.
However, we should remember that within the Puranic texts, the vast cycle of the Dasavatar is not over. Our sources remind us that the wheel of cyclical time keeps turning relentlessly.
Right. The 10th avatar is still pending.
According to the cosmological texts, we are currently deep within the Kali Yuga, the age of maximum darkness, ignorance, and systemic strife. And it is prophesied that at the very end of this age, when chaos and corruption reach their absolute intolerable peak, the 10th avatar, Kalki, will arrive.
And the strategy will pivot once again. Kalki is described not as a peaceful monk sitting under a tree, but as a warrior riding a white horse named Devadatta, carrying a blazing sword to definitively, physically destroy evil and forcefully restore the Satya Yuga, resetting the cycle of truth.
So the pendulum of cosmic intervention swings violently back from psychological peace to overwhelming martial force.
The cosmic balance is constantly, ruthlessly adjusting to the specific nature of the crisis.
What an absolute journey today. To summarize this massive deep dive, we explored the grand, combative mythology of the first 8 avatars of Vishnu, noting the escalation of martial force. Then we watched how a sheltered human prince in the Republic of Kapilavastu shattered the artificial reality of his golden cage.
He faced the devastating visceral reality of disease, old age, and death, nearly starved his physical body to death trying to find a cure, and finally discovered the middle path.
In doing so, he became recognized as Lord Vishnu's 9th form, a divine avatar who saved the world not with a literal bloody sword, but with a profoundly peaceful, fully awakened mind.
A mind that proved capable of neutralizing extreme violence through unshakable compassion. And that leaves us with a highly critical, practical application for today. We have spent this hour discussing ancient texts, cosmic demons, and royal princes. But the fundamental realization of the Buddha was that ultimate freedom isn't about successfully controlling the chaotic world around you. It is entirely about controlling your internal reactions to it.
That is the core mechanism.
So, I leave you with this final thought to analyze in your own life today. When you inevitably face your own personal angulimala, someone coming at you with intense, unprovoked aggression, or when you receive unaccepted gifts of anger, frustration, or disrespect from the world, how will you respond?
Will you immediately fight back using the exhausted weapons of ego, reactivity, and anger? Or will you deploy the ultimate strategy of the 9th avatar? Stand your ground, refuse to accept the toxic gift, and conquer the situation through absolute stillness?
That is a profound question to carry with you all day. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the sources. We unpacked a massive amount of philosophy and history today, but there is always more to learn. Keep questioning your own conditioning, keep exploring the mind, and stay curious. We will see you on the next deep dive.